Hello and welcome to a pro basketball show with me, Andrew Willett. We are in the midst of WNBA coverage and excited to bring our content to you. You can catch a pro basketball show on streaming services such as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify with live broadcasts on playback. Make sure to follow us at APBShow on social media platforms such as Twitter and Instagram, with more coming soon. Without further ado, a pro basketball show. Welcome to a pro basketball show. We are getting set and ready for the WNBA season, just a few days away, and today we're going to talk about one of the league's premier franchises, one of the greatest dynasties prior to the last few years, and that is the Minnesota Lynx. To do so, I've brought on one of the experts in Minnesota hoops, the host of Hitting the Hardwood, a reporter for Canis Hoopus and Winsider, Sports Betting Dime, RotoWire. He does it all. That's Mitchell Hansen. Mitchell, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
Hey, good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it and happy to talk a little Lynx basketball.
Absolutely. We are beyond excited over here to get the season started, get to some actual basketball. But I want to make sure we're all ready, and I'm checking in with each team. Before we get into the Minnesota Lynx, I'm curious for you. It's been the offseason for the 12 teams in the association. But for you, what have you been up to since the Las Vegas Aces were crowned champions last fall?
Basically just kind of covering the league and kind of seeing how the off season's unfolded. Obviously it's been a little bit of it's been a busy off season in general, which has been entertaining, not only with the player movement but the coaching movement and just kind of everything that's taken place throughout the league. But also when it comes to the Lynx, it's kind of been kind of a little bit of a quiet off season, which is not, it's not, what a lot of people maybe expected or kind of hoped for, but, just kind of been kind of hammering out, kind of keep an eye on everything that's been taking place, not only with the Lynx specific, but league wide. And now we're finally here. We're just about ready for the season, which should be another fun one.
Yeah, Mitchell, when we start to look at the Minnesota Lynx, I looked at the roster from last year to the roster from this year. A lot of players who were on the roster last year no longer there, and a lot of the players brought in draftees as Minnesota entering the age of no Sylvia Fowles being around. Napheesa Collier coming back kind of on a full-time basis. No Cheryl Reeve rather still there officially post-dynasty. And like you said, I kind of felt a lack of moves in the offseason. But from your perspective, where are the Minnesota Lynx right now?
They're, for the first time in a while, they're I think officially in rebuilding mode. I do think that it could be an excelled rebuild, which is hopeful. They do have a good mix of veterans and like you mentioned, the rookie kind of injection into the roster, but this is Napheesa Collier's team officially, and they're going to move forward with her at the forefront of everything they do. They've been very vocal. Cheryl Reeve has been very vocal this offseason about, just kind of all the moves that have been made and will be made will be centered around Napheesa Collier and what her skill set, her strengths and I guess her weaknesses, kind of balancing everything out when it comes to her, but surrounding her with everything that she needs, all the tools that she needs, all the players that she needs to make sure she's happy and she can thrive in this offseason or in this offense and on this team. So, it was kind of a busy, or not a busy, I should say, off season, kind of a quiet off season. But it's for the first time in a while, they have some rookies that'll come into this team and have a chance to make an impact right away. And then they still do have some of the players like Napheesa Collier, Kale McBride, Ariel Powers, Bridget Carlton will see a good amount of time. Jess Shepard will see a good amount of time. They do have a decent amount of old faces or kind of familiar faces. I don't want to say old faces, but kind of familiar faces, but you will see players like, Diamond Miller and Dorka Juhas, and potentially maybe even, if Bree Beal ends up making this roster, she could be another player that's kind of injected into the rotation. But for sure, Juhas and Miller, we'll see a lot of time with them. But Minnesota, like you said, it's the end of the dynasty era. Sylvia Fowles her retirement kind of solidified that and kind of made that final. But yeah, it's a weird time, but I think it'll end up being, knowing Cheryl Reeve, she's very aggressive, and they'll kind of try and make an excelled rebuild if they can. So they're going to do everything they can to get back on track and hopefully just continue to improve from here.
I think you're kind of seeing a few franchises starting to take that kind of an aggressive rebuild, like you said, and make it shorter, like maybe a Chicago, hopefully a Seattle. Again, with the word hopeful there, because I think a lot of teams are kind of in that transition stage. As we start to look at the offseason, some of the moves and the roster itself, I want to take a step back first to last season, where the Minnesota Lynx finished 14-22, come in as the ninth seed, just a game back of that eighth seed. And Sylvia Fowles last season, I'd say from my perspective, it came across as a disappointment in what should have been a retirement tour of sorts for Sylvia Fowles. What were your takeaways from last season?
I do think it was a disappointment. And part of that, and I don't want to make this sound like this is a disappointing reason for everything, but Nafisa Collier, being without Nafisa Collier, who gave birth to her child, she missed all but 4 games last season. Like that's a big piece of the team. And missing her is that was a key factor. And I do think that if they do have Nafisa Collier on this team or on that team last year, they're a playoff team. She's that much of a difference maker for the team. But it was a bit of a disappointment, and obviously you don't want to miss out on the playoffs, and knowing the kind of mentality that Cheryl Reeve and the entire Lynx organization have, they did not take that lightly. They did not want to be in the lottery. They did not want to be picking number 2. They would have been okay with somebody else's picking number 2, but they didn't want it to be their own picking number 2, because that means they had a bad year. But that's unfortunately that's the reality that they're faced with. And I do think it allowed them to, now shifting into 2023, kind of take a step back and take inventory of the roster. This is a good chance for them to kind of step back for the first time in a while and just see what they have, what they want to have, this season, and what they want their future to look like. Obviously they have Nafisa Collier back this year, which will be huge. That'll kind of fill in for that void left behind by Sylvia Fowles. But to answer your question, I do think it was a disappointing year. We're not used to seeing Minnesota at the bottom of the league, and that's something we've seen at least at the start of the last 2 seasons. They did bounce back 2 seasons ago to reach the playoffs, but they weren't able to get the job done last year. But I think that it was a good learning process, and now they can officially turn the page into 2023.
So you've mentioned Nafisa Collier a lot, and obviously just a big difference maker last year, going to be a big difference maker. I'm curious, what tier of superstar do you see her fitting into, and how can Minnesota really help her to reach that full potential as the face now of this franchise?
I think she could, and the reason I say this is because Cheryl Reeve actually kind of mentioned it, in the second week of training camp now, that in between the 2 preseason games, that she didn't necessarily compare them to players or the potential or the skill set of them, but she kind of compared Nafisa Collier to Maya Moore in the fact that, or in the regard that she doesn't have to run a lot of sets for these players. They create their own game. They create their own offense. They do everything themselves. You don't have to, scheme up things for them. You scheme around them. They can make a difference in the game, and that's a sign of a superstar. That's a sign of somebody that can do anything on both ends of the floor, be a leader in the locker room, a leader in the community. That's who Nafisa Collier is. That's what we saw with a player like Maya Moore. Now, is she Maya Moore? Not right now, but she could potentially be that. And and I do think that she is one of the top players in the WNBA. She'll continue now that she's back to what she called 2021 fee, which means she's back to the 2021 version of herself, hopefully. And if that's the case, I do think that she'll kind of take things over, and she will be the top player for the Lynx this season, but it's just a matter of just how much she or how quickly she gets back and back to full strength.
Yeah, it definitely takes some time, and we're hoping for sure. But as we look at the rest of the roster and how they can support her, and I think that's really also going to be a key to getting her back is to support her with the styles or the right kinds of players that you would want to have around her. And so we'll look at their offseason. They only bring in the one free agent from what I could see, Tiffany Mitchell signed, and then a slew of draft picks and undrafted rookies signed to the training camp roster. From your perspective, what do you like about the offseason? Do you think, just for the stage they're in, that it was enough?
I don't know if it was enough. I know that they did try. They tried to go out and get some big name free agents. They tried, they had meetings with Brianna Stewart and Courtney Vandersloot to name a few. They met with Jura Stevens. So they tried. Now they didn't ultimately land those free agents, and they ended up getting Tiffany Mitchell, as you mentioned, as their lone free agent, signing this offseason. But they did end up, going into the draft. Not many people thought that they would pick 5 players. They ended up picking 5 players. They kind of stashed one of them away in Maya Hirsch with the 12th overall pick, who she's not going to play this season, but she'll play potentially in the years ahead. But they did get a good amount in the draft that they can surround Fee with, like you mentioned. Diamond Miller, she's somebody that plays very similar to Nafisa Collier, where she's very aggressive. She likes to get out in transition. She likes to run the floor. Nafisa Collier loves that, and she even mentioned Fee did during training camp that this is the first time she's really played that style in the WNBA. She played that a lot at UConn, which is something that ended up in great success for her in college. But they'll be able to play that kind of style this year. Dorka Juhas, she can stretch the floor. She can shoot from basically anywhere on the floor. So that'll be a nice addition, specifically when it comes to the rookies. And then you have the players, the players that are already on the roster, like Kayla McBride, Ariel Powers. They can obviously be deep ball threats and, kind of hang around the outside and let Fee kind of operate on the inside if she wants to, or be aggressive or kind of, dash into the paint. And then you do have, you have a lot of versatility on this team. They have a lot of players that can play multiple positions. And I think they're very positionless this year, which is not something we're used to seeing with this team. Normally we see the traditional point guard, the Lindsay Whalen leading, 2 wings and 2 big posts. That's not the case this year. They're very kind of even across the board, and players being able to play multiple positions, which is interesting, and it might end up being a matchup nightmare for other teams. We'll see how that pans out. But like you said, everything that they did this offseason, whether it's the draft picks or even going out and get Tiffany Mitchell, it had Nafisa Collier in mind, and she, like I said, I keep going back to her, but she's at the center of everything that they're doing.
And I think that's important as well. I'm curious. You start to mention some of the styles, so let's go right into it. No Sylvia Fowles down low has an effect both on the defense and the offense, as like you said, a lot more positionless. Do you think we could see a much more switchy style of defense, as well as Shale Reeve changing the offense a little bit?
Yes, I think to both points, I think so. I do think that I think they're gonna struggle a little bit defensively. That's somewhere that or an area that they struggled in last year. I think that they don't have a ton of defense right now. You look at, like, a player like Bree Beal. That's what's enticing about her potentially getting a final roster spot. As a rookie, is that she can play. She's a lockdown defender. And that's something that will be of need for this team defensively. But I do think that they will be very switch heavy, defense. They'll be very versatile, like I said, as they will be on the other side of the ball on the offensive end. I do think that we will see a little bit of a different style offensively from Reeve and the style of offense that they play. They're going to push the pace a lot. They've even stressed that a lot in the first preseason game. As soon as they get the ball, they're going. They're pushing the pace. They're running the floor. They're being aggressive. Now, how sustainable that is with the conditioning of players, that'll be interesting to see. But I do think that we will see a very different style, both defensively and offensively. in what Minnesota is able to do, because they don't have that post player that they go through like they have with Sylvia Fowles the last handful of years, or more than a handful of years. But yeah, they're gonna be starting from the outside in rather than going from the inside out, which will be an interesting style to watch.
Well, I'm gonna be looking forward to watching how Shale Reeve adjusts and to watching that team get up and down, like you mentioned. That's definitely going to be a fun style of play, I believe. But it's we've gotten too long of this podcast for me to not bring up the draft and the selection of Diamond Miller. You've mentioned Diamond Miller, but what are your thoughts on her early on, and what is her potential going forward?
I think that she looked very, it's kind of hard. You got to take it with a grain of salt. The first preseason game of the year, but she did look good in the first preseason game. She showed her ability to, like I said, be aggressive, kind of match that style of play that we were talking about. Run the floor, kind of stretch things out a little bit. She was able to kind of play a little iso ball at some point, which was good to see, and create her own offense. She almost finished with 20 points. She finished with a team high in the first preseason win over Washington. But I do think she'll fit really well with this team. She'll fit really well next to Napheesa Collier, especially. And then you kind of pair her with the other players on the roster. I think she'll fit in really well. I do think that she'll get playing time, which is key. She'll get a lot of playing time right away, whether she's going to go through, ups and downs as every rookie does. She might have that more so early on than maybe we've seen in the past from other Lynx rookies, but that's part of the learning process. And Minnesota's not really in a space right now where they need somebody to come in and be that consistent contributor. But I do think that her potential, she could be her and Napheesa Collier could be a 1-2 punch. And I think that having that 1-2 punch on the wing too is very, very key. And that's something that could be, something that's very dangerous in the future if Minnesota is able to kind of dip into free agency or the trade market, maybe add a few more pieces around them. I think that her potential is very high. I think that she probably has the highest potential out of anyone outside of Leah Boston in the draft. Which is why Minnesota targeted her at number 2. But I think that she'll contribute right away. She'll have her opportunities, which is good for a rookie, and that'll only continue to help her grow into her potential moving forward.
And you mentioned Boston too. I think she might be like as close to a lot as she was for the first overall pick, close to a lot for the Rookie of the Year. Diamond Miller, what do you think she'll be in that race for sure?
I think it might be harder for Diamond just because, Aaliyah, I think she's going to be the front runner. Well, she will be the front runner to begin the season as a favorite for it. I think that, having, and this isn't a knock on Diamond Miller, but having somebody like Collier that's going to, grab a lot of the attention on offense as far as being the primary scorer and just kind of everything running through her. I think that might, impact things a little bit. I look at somebody like Jordan Horston from, she was from Tennessee, now playing for Seattle. I think she could potentially be a dark horse just for the fact that she's going to be getting a ton of playing time. I mean, Seattle's not as good as they were in years past. So she'll get a lot of playing time. I do think that we could be looking at, maybe those two and maybe Diamond Miller getting thrown into the mix. And there's always a dark horse outside of that. But if I had to put money on it right now, a lot can change. But if I had to put up money on it right now, I would say Leah Boston probably gets Rookie of the Year. But you never know with if an injury happens with Minnesota, heaven forbid, Napheesa Collier or another key player for the Lynx gets hurt, Diamond Miller has to step up. You never know, and you never really know with the WNBA is it's unpredictable. So it'll be interesting to watch. And the cool thing is a lot of the rookies will be getting a lot of playing time right away, which is fun to see.
That will be fun, and I'm curious if we'll see the same thing on the Minnesota side. I know you said ended up using a lot of those draft picks, stashing one away. But do you think that they will all have a shot at making this roster? I know it's going to be tight at the end of it. You mentioned a lot of returning players already. Do you think how many rookies do you think could make it?
Well, right now they have 4 in camp because Maya Hirsch, as I mentioned earlier, she's going to be overseas yet. The 19-year-old prospect that they took 12th overall. She'll be overseas. She's not going to come over this summer, so she's not with the team. But they have 4 players, those being Diamond Miller, Dorky Uhas, Bria Veal, and Taylor Soule. And I think for sure 2, potentially 3. I know that I believe that while Diamond Miller is obviously a lock, I believe that Dorky Uhas is a lock, and I think Bria Veal has a shot. I know that I do think that there are a lot of fans of her within the organization. They chose her for a reason where they in the draft because they were fans of her. But I know that Cheryl's a fan of her. Cheryl Reeve likes her as, that defensive prowess that we talked about earlier. So I think that alone will give her a shot. If she had a little bit, maybe more of a polished offensive game, I think that she would have an even better shot. But it'll be interesting to me to see if her or the likes of maybe Lindsay Allen make the roster as that final spot. But I for sure 2, potentially 3 with Bria Veal kind of on the fence right now, and we'll see what happens the rest of training camp. There's a lot that still could unfold yet.
Absolutely. And by the time this comes out too, a lot of cuts are going to be made, not only in Minnesota, but around the league. All in all, Mitchell, on this offseason, how would you rate how the Lynx did? And do you think this is just kind of where they're at with expectations in a rebuilding phase?
I'd say I'd give it a C, and I say that because I view C as average. I think that they had an average offseason. If you would have asked me that going into the draft, I maybe would have leaned D, just because I thought they had underwhelming free agency, obviously only signing one player, that being Tiffany Mitchell. For a team that did have high hopes in the offseason and going out and getting some free agents, they swung and missed on a few of them. So I would say that maybe free agency D, the draft, I think maybe they got to B. So that kind of balances out to a C where I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I do think that, they are at the mercy of the state of the franchise, and only one way to fix that is to be able to build through the draft, be able to add pieces that you don't have to rely on free agency like they have in the past. And, they got to improve their talent that they have right now, and that'll attract free agents. But overall, I think they did have a strong draft. I think, with the, the at least the top 4 picks, the 3 picks that are in camp, I'll say, Diamond Miller, Dorky Uhas, and Bria Veal, they all had first round buzz. And, to be able to have those 3 within your top 4 picks, Bria Veal at one point was maybe a top, 8 pick, and she ended up getting taken in the second round by Minnesota. So, they had a strong draft. They had a little bit of an underwhelming free agency, but I would just say overall they had a very average offseason, and we'll see kind of how things pan out this year. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, is this allows them a chance to take inventory of what they have, to be able to kind of take a step back, and no new players sometimes is okay when you're trying to do that, to figure out what you have and finally give those players opportunities.
So I've mentioned the departure of Sylvia Fowles to retirement. Nafisa Collier obviously coming back as the leader of this team. Someone I haven't mentioned is the loss of Mariah Jefferson, no more Mo Jeff, and I think that's going to hurt them as well. Who do you see taking over this point guard spot coming into the year?
That was an interesting development this offseason. I think a lot of people expected her to be back. And I'm one of them. I thought she was going to be back. I thought, she thrived in Cheryl's offense, and I thought Cheryl Reeve, enjoyed, having her as a point guard and being kind of more so of that traditional point guard that Cheryl's often liked. But that obviously wasn't the case. Her going to Phoenix and, kind of joining them and signing with them as a free agent. Nice signing for them. I think she'll have another nice year this year, like she did with the Lynx last year. But when it comes to what's left behind, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of people are really interested in that, and that's why I think a lot of when I said earlier about the roster being kind of interchangeable, I think that's especially where we're going to see it. They're not going to have a traditional point guard. That's not on the roster right now. I mean, you look at who might be offensive initiators. You could see, anybody from, let's say, Lindsey Allen makes the roster. She could be a backup. Rachel Banham. I think Tiffany Mitchell is going to be is going to be playing a decent amount of quote unquote point guard. And not a lot of people view her as a guard, but I think that she's going to end up being kind of the initiator of the offense more so than anybody else. You could look at other players like, Kayla McBride and Ariel Powers. Maybe they end up starting to take over and start to do a little bit of offensive initiating. I wouldn't even rule out Nafisa Collier being, kind of that quote unquote point guard at some point, like we see with LeBron James in the NBA, kind of that forward, initiating the offense. So they're not gonna have that traditional point guard, but they're gonna have a lot of I think a lot of different hands on the ball and being able to initiate the offense. You could throw Diamond Miller into that mix. Maybe she's able to do a little bit of that as well. But yeah, this isn't the Minnesota Lynx of old when we had Lindsey Whalen leading the offense and being that traditional floor general. It's a different time.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too for Minnesota because each of the last 2 seasons they have someone come in and take over that point guard role. I don't know of a name right now. Obviously that's something the Lynx are familiar with, but yeah, Mariah Jefferson last year, I was a big fan of how she they came in and played really well, filled that point guard spot for Minnesota, but also kind of found herself with the Lynx and played some of her best basketball in the W. And so I'll be interested to see. I like that concept of more positionless, so you can have a lot of players there dishing out the basketball. All right. My last question before we get into some of the fun ones. What tier do you see this team sitting in their rebuilding phase heading into the year?
When it comes out to like kind of the layout of the league, I would still say they're probably a bottom half team. And obviously there's 12 teams, so if you finish bottom half, you're still at a chance for a playoff spot. I would think that they're going to probably be around that 7, 8, 9 spot like they were last year. Maybe putting a run together for trying to reach a playoff spot or one of those final 2 spots. I don't think they're going to finish worse. I could see them having a very similar year to last year. So I guess when it comes to kind of the tier, I'd say maybe, bottom half, maybe bottom third, but I think they'll be right there in the kind of the bottom half of their bottom of the playoff picture.
Confident in what Nafisa Collier can be in her return. I like that. That again, I've had a lot of these preview pod interviews and everyone's hopeful. But I'm hearing a lot of that 4 through 9 sort of range from the teams I've talked to so far. As we start to get into some of those fun predictions, do you have a win-loss prediction for this Minnesota Lynx team? As you say, sitting 8 through 9, 7, 8, 9.
I think they could be floating around 500, kind of similar to what they were maybe last year. I think, you kind of mentioned it right at the end of your last comment that you just made, that 4 through 9 is going to be kind of pretty even. I think it's going to be more so even than, we've seen in years past. Normally we have, that kind of 5 through 8 spot, that's a range that's kind of pretty even. But I think this year more so than ever, it's going to be about 4 through 9, 4 through 10. That's going to be pretty even. So I think Minnesota will probably be around that 500 mark again.
Okay, I'll take that. As we start to look at some of the awards, this is specifically for the Minnesota Lynx. Who's the Lynx MVP?
I think you got to go with Nafisa Collier. I think she's going to have a bounce back year this year.
Agreed. Most improved player?
Ooh, most improved player. Let's go. I think let's go with Jess Shepard. I think Jess Shepard's going to have a good year this year. Let's go with her.
Okay. I think that's a good call. I think there are a few options, depending on really who makes this roster by the end of the next couple of weeks. I like that though. Sixth player of the year coming off the bench. Who is it?
Sixth player, I'm going to say Dorka Juhas. I think she comes off the bench more so than I could see her. I could see her maybe getting into the starting lineup. I think her and maybe Jess Shepard are going to kind of be interchangeable, but I think Jess Shepard will get the nod right away. So I think Dorka Juhas will be coming off the bench and kind of providing that spark offensively off the bench. If I had to pick another player, I think Aerial Powers. I think she'll be primarily coming off the bench this year, or I could see her coming off the bench. And if that's the case, then I would maybe even pick her over Dorka Juhas. But those two players, one of those two, I think will get it.
Okay. I see. I'm a big Aerial Powers fan. If she's coming off the bench, that's my pick as well. But yeah, Powers and Taylor McBride, two of my favorites to go out and watch. I'm excited to see what they do this year with Fee and Diamond. But defensive player of the year, you lose a 4-time winner with Sylvia Fowles. Who steps up for the Lynx?
Let's go with, you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that, let's say Jess Shepard again. I think Jess Shepard is going to kind of be that paint presence for the Lynx. And I think let's go with her.
Okay. Well, we'll stick with Jessica Shepard. I like it. And then you already mentioned a rookie so far on the awards, but I've opened it up to newcomers as well, because not all rookies make every team. But rookie or newcomer of the year for Minnesota.
I think it's gonna be Diamond Miller. I think she's gonna have a solid year this year. That's specifically for rookie. I'm gonna split it up between rookie and newcomer. So I'm gonna do rookie. I'm gonna do Diamond Miller. Newcomer, I mean, well, it would have to be, I guess, Tiffany Mitchell, but okay, I'll tie them together. Let's say Diamond Miller or Tiffany Mitchell. But I think Tiffany Mitchell is going to have a good year too. And I think she's going to play in maybe a little bit of a bigger role than what a lot of people think and expect.
Yeah, Minnesota, they, like you said, they tried for some of these bigger horses in the race, and Tiffany Mitchell, I think, really impressed me at the end of her tenure. I like you bringing her up for that. Now for some of the even more fun ones, the superlatives, the unsung hero of this team.
Unsung hero, let's go. I'm gonna go back to her again. Let's say Jess Shepard. I think Jess Shepard's gonna be solid. Her or Dorka Juhas. I think they play kind of a little bit of similar styles. Jess Shepard's a little bit more of a bruiser, kind of a inside presence. But I think Jess Shepard is she's one of those players that just does it all. And she kind of does things that don't show up in the stat sheet.
And it's fitting too, because we do a whole podcast and don't mention her much and get right down to the awards, and she's there for everyone. So I like it.
She's kind of like a Rebecca Brunson to me, where she kind of flies under the radar and doesn't get a lot of the hype, but is very key to the team.
I like that as well. All right. So from following the team, do you have any sense of a class clown on this roster?
Aerial Powers. I'll go with Aerial Powers. She's probably one of the more unique personalities on the team. Let's say maybe outside of her, Bridget Carlton. Oh no, I take that back. Rachel Banham. Rachel Banham is Aerial Powers or Rachel Banham. One of those two. I would give it to them.
And lastly, here, the best trash talker on the team.
I think you might have to go back with Aerial Powers again. I'd say her, maybe Kayla McBride. Those two are pretty good trash talkers.
It's a good quality to have, especially if you've got that personality to be the class clown. I like it a lot. Mitchell Hansen, you do such great work. Can you tell people where they can go find your stuff?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is M_Hansen13, and that's HANSEN 13. You can also find, as you mentioned, I appreciate you plugging the podcast. I have a link specific podcast called Hitting the Hardwood. You can find that on Twitter at Hitting Hardwood. Or you can follow me on social media to see all my work, but you can also find my work at Canis Hoopus, Winsider, Sports Betting Diamond, RotoWire. So kind of all over the place, try and cover everything. So I appreciate you allowing me to plug that, and hopefully everybody enjoys it and goes and checks that stuff out.
Absolutely, yeah. Hitting the Hardwood, very good. Had some fun listening to the last episode earlier today. Go check out Mitchell's stuff. As we get to the end of this episode, Mitchell, do you have any other takes you want to get out there about the 2023 season, as it's just a less than a week away? by the time this gets released?
I would say that overall, when it comes to the league, I think that it's going to be an interesting year. I think it's going to be a slow start to the year. I think there's a lot of new pieces in new places. The Liberty and Aces are going to be atop the league. They do have new pieces though, and it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of mesh those together. The rest of the league, they kind of, a lot of people are still in transition phases. We don't know what Brittany Griner is gonna, I guess, look like when in her return to the court. Hopefully, she's able to return to form, but we don't know what that'll all look like. So it'll be kind of interesting to watch them. Washington, I think, is a dark horse to kind of put up a run and kind of give fits to the Aces or Liberty in the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see if Elena Deladon is healthy. And then just kind of the rest of the league. What are we going to see from them? Everybody's it's up in the air. So I think that overall the league it'll be interesting this year. It'll be very transparent. It'll be kind of interesting to see the final roster cuts and what teams decide to do with their teams, how the new coaches mesh with their new teams. But I think it'll be an entertaining year, and I think that it'll be a fun one to see the kind of the stars in new places this year.
Exactly. Cannot wait for this season. Here we had a 2023 Minnesota Lynx preview pod here on a Pro Basketball Show. Mitchell Hansen, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I had a good time.
Thank you so much for tuning into a Pro Basketball Show. You can catch a Pro Basketball Show on streaming services such as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify with live broadcasts on playback. Make sure to follow us at APBShow on social media platforms such as Twitter and Instagram, with more coming soon. Until next time, I am Andrew Willett. Thank you for tuning in.